place that I ever been.
It was so hot in there too.
It was really.
It was, yeah, it was getting hot. Yeah.
Ben, that's for you.
Linda.
Oh,
There's no remote, and I'll go get the thing, but there's nobody on when I look them in.
We're ready to call to order the January 7th, 2026 meeting of the school committee. Calling to order the January 7th, 2026 meeting of the Newton School Committee. Welcome. We will, as usual, start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and unfortunately, we do not have our fifth grader today. I think we have some comments about Bert, and hopefully he will join us soon, but go ahead.
So Bert is a fifth grader from Bowen who actually is ill today, but we're going to ask him back at another time. But he was recommended by his principal as a student whose curiosity and creativity shine in everything he does. He's an enthusiastic learner who loves math and coding and can be found sharpening his skills on Freckle or building something new with his boundless imagination every day. Known for his terrific personality and playful sense of humor, he brings joy to classmates and teachers every day. Recess is one of his favorite times, and you can spot him with a basketball in hand as he heads to the playground. And outside of school, he enjoys playing video games and challenging friends and family to games of ping pong. So Bert, we'll look forward to you leading us in the pledge another time.
In the meantime, I think we should do it as a team. So if you, there's no obligation to participate, but if you would like to rise and are able and willing.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So with no public comment this evening, we will move directly to the consent agenda, which consists tonight of the special meeting leadership caucus minutes from 11/17. Is there any need to pull items from the consent agenda? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second? Second. Any discussion? Yeah. If no discussion, let's go ahead and take a vote. Ward 1,
Yes.
2,
Yes.
3,
Yes.
4, yes, 5,
Yes.
6. We have Jonathan. Oh, have we not patched Jonathan in?
I just noticed he's not a panelist.
Okay. Jonathan is unfortunately ill tonight, so he's not with us, but will be joining via Zoom. Ward 7 is a yes. Ward 8.
Yes.
Mayor Laredo.
Yes.
So we will pass with 8 votes for yes and 1 absent.
There he is.
Moving on. Hi, Jonathan. Welcome.
Hi.
Moving on to the first discussion topic is the superintendent's update.
Hello, good evening, everyone, and Happy New Year. I just have a couple of announcements tonight. First, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge some of the Education Center staff that make each of our meetings happen. Kim Scaltrado, who is our second shift Education Center custodian. You've seen her around here. She sets us all up, makes sure we all have everything and cleans up after us. Lisa Mazzola, who is our recording secretary for the school committee. She's also our public records officer and the secondary education executive assistant. She is clutch in all the things that we need for the school committee. And finally, behind the scenes, the wizard in the closet, director of technology, Stephen Ritendi. Just want everyone to know all the folks who make every meeting happen. Second, it's an exciting time of year where we turn our eyes to our incoming kindergarten students. So this message is to every Newton resident who has a potential rising kindergartner. We are pleading to you to complete the kindergarten census, which has been released. And right now, parents, only 30 of you have filled that out. And we know that there are more than 30 of you. We've been blasting out that information. It's on our website. The mayor's team has graciously added it to their newsletter. And this supports our planning for kindergarten age children. And you fill it out regardless of whether maybe you're exploring other enrollment plans, but we would like the opportunity to be with you and talk with you. And we haven't heard from a lot of our families. Please know that a virtual new kindergarten parent information night will be held Monday, March 2nd at 7 p.m. Registration opens that same day. All registration procedures are on our website if you'd like to check them out now. But families are encouraged to complete registration by March 20th to help us plan for staffing and programming and to inform the budget for the upcoming school year. We really look forward to welcoming your young people, and we're very excited to meet your kindergartner. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Any questions about the superintendent's update? Okay, let's move on to our first item for discussion, which is the enrollment analysis report.
I'd like to ask Dr. Katie Hogue, our Chief of Data and Research, to join us. She is the author of this impressive tome, our enrollment report, which she has owned over time. She also has a presentation this evening, which took into consideration the questions that you all submitted to us beforehand. And if I'm not hearing those questions answered, I'll actually go back to your questions and I'll make sure that they're asked. And of course, if any new organic questions come up, you'll give them to us so we can have the conversation. Katie and I did have a discussion of, there's a little bit of like enrollment analysis 101 in this presentation, which our former school committee knew about because they had been here for a longer time, about just what is behind the enrollment analysis and how is this particular report different than, say, NESDEC projections or McKibben projections, which many of you asked about. I did have one school committee member asked, so what is the goal of doing this report every year? So you didn't see that list of questions, and we're going to have a follow-up conversation about some of those questions. But the goal of this report is to help inform our planning for the short term and the long term. And it is the backdrop to what will then be released in terms of what we call arrays, which are how many elementary classrooms are we projecting for a year, and what are our team sizes at the middle school, what are the class sizes looking like at the high school. So we do that in this order. Here were the projections, here are the updates, and then as we head into the budget season, you'll have some decisions to make about what you would like those arrays to look like based on several scenarios that Katie and I will bring to you. So the goal is for you to understand that we watch like a hawk all the things that happen with enrollment, and it's important to us to keep you updated to the finest point possible so that it's very transparent. How many kids are here? What's the staffing ratio? And Katie is the person in charge of tracking all of that. You ask a lot of questions about who's in, who's out, who's going to private school, who's coming in. This gives you all of that information each year so that you can track how we're doing against those standards. This report's been happening for a really long time in Newton, correct, Katie?
Yep. Don't know the date off the top of my
Okay.
head, but we've got books going back to like the 70s,
Mhm.
maybe the 60s
Mm-hmm.
in business office, if anyone wants to take a peek.
All right, so with that, I will turn it over to Katie for the presentation, and I'll be tracking your questions as we go.
Great. It's nice to see everybody. Thank you for having me tonight. So like Anna said, this is more of a like enrollment analysis 101 presentation, including what we're seeing in the projections, and hopefully we'll capture most of the questions that you have, but we'll be happy to answer any that come up at the end. And I will reiterate a couple things that Dr. Nolan has already said throughout this presentation. So tonight I'm going to talk through the purpose of the report, as well as the key points that come out of this long document. Then I'll talk about what's happening now, which is our current enrollment. I'll talk about how we calculated the projections or our methodology for this report. We'll look at what we're projecting for the 5-year projections for the future. I'll talk about how we compare our projections to other external projections like NESDEC and the McKibben report. I'll touch briefly on how we're using the projections to plan for next year, which Dr. Nolan has already mentioned. And then I'll talk a little bit about the other pieces that we include in the report that are not just enrollment projections. So as Dr. Nolan said, the main purpose of this report is to provide enrollment estimates for both budget and facilities planning for the future. So most importantly, that's for next school year. And as Dr. Nolan said, we track enrollment through the spring and summer very closely with the goal of looking at the number of classrooms that we're going to need. So you'll see if you're looking at some of the tables in this report, when we look at our projections by grade level, sometimes they're not exactly, we don't hit the number 100%, but the main goal is looking at ensuring that we have the correct number of classrooms by grade in school. So while we might be off by 5 students at a school, our goal is to ensure that we have the right number of classrooms for that grade in school. And then when we look at the enrollment projections over the next 5 years, the goal there is looking at trends, what we think we're going to be seeing, because we do revise the report every year based on the current year enrollment, which does make adjustments to the projections over the 5 years. The other purpose of the report is to track historical enrollment by grade in school. So like we just mentioned, we have these reports going back many, many years, which is a really valuable resource, especially when we're looking at shifts over time, changes in district boundaries, and to have a sense of what has happened. So some of the key points that come out of this year's report, we'll look first at this year's enrollment. So in the fall, I did a preliminary enrollment report, which we were still finalizing enrollment numbers at the time. So this report shows the final enrollment numbers as of October 1st, as we report to the state. Enrollment this school year declined as projected in Newton, although the actual decline that we saw was slightly larger than what we projected last winter. So we saw a decline of 159 students in Newton this year from last year, which is a decrease of negative 1.4% from last year. We were projecting a decline. We calculate something called variance from projection, which is a measure of error of the actual enrollment compared to what we projected the year before. This year's enrollment resulted in a variance from projection of negative 0.5%, which means the actual enrollment that we saw was 61 students below what we projected last winter. Looking forward, we're projecting an overall enrollment decline for the next 3 years, district-wide K-12, followed by projected stability around 11,150 students, K through 12. And then I want to note that we add students from new and anticipated residential developments. We work closely with the planning department at the city to ensure that we have the latest information on residential developments, including the distribution of bedroom types for things that are in the planning or building stages. And we add students from those residential developments into our 5-year projections. So for this school year, students are being added, or for this report, excuse me, students are being added from 18 residential developments over the 5 years, which results in an addition of 544 students over the 5-year projections from these developments. And I'll just note that we only include residential developments in the projections for buildings that have a special permit, comprehensive permit, or building permit. All right, so shifting to what's happening this year with our current enrollment, the graph on this page is looking at the variance from projection, or our measure of error, by level. So the blue line is the elementary school level, red is middle school, green is high school, and purple is the district. And this is looking at the variance from projection since 2016 through the current school year. As I mentioned before, our current enrollment K through 12 of 11,335 students resulted in a variance of negative 0.5% because we were projecting 11,396 students. Looking at our average variance over the past 10 years, omitting 2020 to 2021 and 21 to 22, which had impacts from COVID, our average variance at the district level has been 0%, meaning that our projections at the district level have been basically equivalent to the enrollment that we saw with some slight fluctuations. This is looking at 1-year projections. So what we projected in the prior year and then what happened the next year. This year, if we look at the 1-year variance by level, at the elementary school level, the variance was negative 0.4%, meaning elementary school enrolled slightly below what we projected. Middle school had variance of 0%. It enrolled basically at projection, and high school had variance of negative 0.5%, enrolling slightly below projection. So you can see in the graph, we sort of fluctuate right around this 0% line in the middle here, with the exception of 2020 to 21 and 21 to 22, where we had much lower enrollment than projected, which we believe is impacted by COVID. So shifting now to looking at the projections for the next 5 years, we have 2 different ways that we do the enrollment projections. One at the kindergarten, one for kindergarten projections, and then a separate methodology for grades 1 through 12. So I'll talk about kindergarten first. So the way that we did the kindergarten projections this year is we calculated a adjusted 5-year average of historical kindergarten enrollments by school. So we looked at the past 5 years of resident enrollment for each school, calculated an average, and then made some adjustments, which I'll talk about in a second. Once we calculate that 5-year average, we compare it to the number of births to Newton residents 5 years prior to the year in which those students would enroll in kindergarten. And this results in something that we call the birth to kindergarten ratio, which I'll talk about in a little more detail in a second. But this ratio essentially gives us a sense of a comparison of how many kindergartners are we enrolling compared to the number of students or children who were born 5 years prior. That ratio is typically over 1, meaning that we've got more students enrolling in kindergarten than were born to Newton residents 5 years prior, which makes sense as people are moving into the city. Once we calculate that ratio, we look at how that ratio compares to what we've seen historically, and is it much higher or lower than what we've seen in recent years. If it is much higher or lower, we make some adjustments to try to bring that ratio more in line with what we've seen in recent years in Newton. And that's what we did this year, and I'll show that on the next slide. Because those ratios were higher, we adjusted each school's projected kindergarten enrollment down slightly to reduce this ratio over the next 5 years, so it looks similar to what we've experienced in recent history. And we made those adjustments by school proportionate to the percentage of housing, the percentage of apartments, and the number of home sales that happened within each district, elementary school district. So the graph here and the table give you more information about what this birth to kindergarten ratio looks like. So the graph at the top is looking at the number of students who enrolled in kindergarten in the fall of each year on the blue line. And then the red line is looking at the number of births to Newton residents 5 years prior. So you can see typically we have more students enrolling in kindergarten than were born 5 years prior, as I mentioned before. The exception in this graph is the fall of 2020, where we had fewer students enrolled than were born 5 years prior, which we believe is an impact of COVID. And then the table below is basically calculating a ratio from the data that's in this graph. So you can see the year is the year that students started kindergarten, and then the ratio of births to enrollment is in the second row. Over the past 5 years, we've had an average birth to K ratio of 1.08 and a 10-year average ratio of 1.07, omitting 2020. The cells that are in gray on the right-hand side are the projections for the next 5 years. So you can see here that the ratios are still higher than what we've seen over the past 5 to 10 years. So we've got ratios ranging from 1.12 to 1.25, meaning that we're projecting more kindergarten students than we have seen in recent years based on the number of births. So it doesn't mean more total, but it's a higher increase of students compared to the number of children who were born to Newton residents 5 years prior. And the reason for that is twofold. First, we are adding, as I mentioned before, quite a few students from residential developments that are coming online in Newton, and we tend to see more students come in the elementary grade levels from new development, and anticipated increases in home sales as people start to get older and sell their homes for smaller living spaces. The methodology to calculate the enrollment projections for grades 1 through 12 uses a different method. This, for grades 1 through 12, we use a 5-year average cohort survival ratio, which is calculated by grade in school. So a cohort survival ratio, or a CSR, is another ratio that's looking at the number of students who are in a particular grade level and school cohort for the current school year compared to the number of students who were in that cohort for the prior year. So for example, if we're looking at the current second grade at Zervis, we would look at the number of students this fall in grade 2 at Zervis and compare it to the number of students who were in the first grade last year at Zervis to calculate the CSR. A CSR of 1 means that there is stability in that cohort. So you have the same number of students in each year. Doesn't mean it's the same students, actual kids, like kids can come and go, but that the total number stays stable. A CSR over 1 means that there has been growth in that cohort, and a CSR under 1 means that we have lost students in that cohort and by school and grade. So we calculate these CSRs for the past 5 years by school and grade, and we average them. And then we use those average CSRs and this year's enrollment data by school and grade to calculate projections by school and grade for the next 5 years. We then add non-resident student projections and students from new developments to the projections by grade and school, and then we aggregate them by school, grade, and district to come up with the total numbers. So those two methodologies result in the data that is on this graph. This graph is showing you 15 years of actual enrollment in Newton at the district level in the lighter blue bars. And then the teal colored bars at the right-hand side are the 5 years of the projection. So as I mentioned before, enrollment's projected to decrease for the next 3 years and then stabilize around 11,150 students for the remaining years of the projection, as displayed in this graph. When we look at the 5-year projections by level, there's slight variation here. So the graph on this slide is showing you 15 years of enrollment by level, as well as 5 years of projections. So the top line, which is purple and blue, is the elementary enrollment and projections. We are projecting a decrease next year at the elementary level, followed by slight increases in the next 4 years. The middle line is the high school enrollment. So that one is red and blue. At the high school level, I know I'm going out of order here, but I'm going, in the order of the graph. At the high school level, we're projecting decreases for the next 2 years and followed by 3 years of slight increases or stability. And then the bottom line in the graph is middle school, which is green and blue. And at the middle school level, we're projecting an increase next year, followed by slight decreases over the remaining 4 years. So we always compare our projections to external projections to get a sense of, whether it feels accurate or we need to look in more detail at our own projections. Every year we compare our projections to NESDEC. So NESDEC is the New England School Development Economic Council. Okay, I think I got that one right. So that is a organization that provides projections for many school districts across New England. They update their projections yearly for us based on our October 1 enrollment, which we provide to them every year. So we always compare to them. And then we also have had a demographic analysis conducted by a company called Cropper GIS in McKibbin. That was done in both 2019 and 2024. So we are able to compare both Newton and NESDEC projections to that report as well. It has not been updated since 2024, which is why it's not included in the report itself, because I would imagine that they would say it should be updated yearly based on what happens. So we put NESDEC in here, but I've got some graphs in the presentation to compare to their data too. Newton and NESDEC were both closer to actual total enrollment in Newton, both last school year and this school year, than the projections in the Cropper GIS report from 2024. So I'll show that here. So this slide is showing the variance from from 1-year projections for the Newton projection, the NESDEC projection, and the McKibbin projections. So the first set of bars is for last school year, and then the second set of bars on the right is for the current school year. So both last year and this year, all 3 groups projected higher enrollment than what we actually saw, but McKibbin's were the furthest from actual enrollment. So you can see last year, NPS variance was negative 0.2%, NESDEC was negative 0.3%, and McKibbin was negative 0.6%. And those numbers were slightly larger this year. Just for the sake of comparison here too, this slide is looking at the projections for the next 5 years for the NPS projections, the NESDEC projections, and the McKibbin projections. So the green line on this graph is the McKibbin projections for the next 5 years. Blue is Newton's, and then red is NESDEC's. So you can see for next school year, NPS and NESDEC are both projecting slightly lower than what the McKibbin report projects. And then over the 5 years, Newton and McKibbin's projections come kind of more in line with each other, while NESDEC's decline over the 5 years. And I do want to note that the NESDEC projections do include the projected students from new residential development as well. Okay, so shifting to how we use these projections, and Dr. Nolan already sort of mentioned this, so I won't go into too much detail, but we monitor enrollment very closely through the spring and summer by school and grade level. The shift that we made in recent years to online registration has made this much more accurate and timely, because we are able to see registrations in all stages of the registration process at a moment's glance. So that is very helpful. And when possible, we like to use the kindergarten census. So just another plug for people to please fill it out, regardless of what you might be planning for next year. It's just very helpful for us to plan for next year. We use this information to make any necessary staffing changes that might happen based on enrollment at individual schools. And then we also use the projections for buffer zone planning through the spring. So it helps identify potential areas where there might be not enough space in a building for projected enrollment. And we come back to you as a committee to make suggestions around changes or additions to buffer zones. Okay, and then finally, just shifting to the additional components of the report that are not directly related to enrollment projections, but provide some context. We include a section on student exits and entrances from the prior school year, and this looks at reasons for exit and entrance by both grade and school level. We have a section on non-public school enrollments from the prior year, which I'm going to talk about in a little more detail on the next slide. And then we also have a detailed section of FAQs and tables around anticipated enrollment from residential development and how we're calculating that for each development. And then I just want to say a couple more things around the non-public school enrollment, because I know there were some questions around that. So we, as a district, conduct an enrollment census every January. It's currently underway for this year. That census collects information on all Newton resident students, no matter where they're attending. So we get information on what school every school-age child in Newton is attending from the schools themselves. We present a memo in the spring that reports on this census with the current year enrollment. So what you're seeing in the report is based on last January's census. I'll come back in the spring to report out on what we're seeing for this school year. And then just to point, I just want to note that the enrollment in non-public schools varies widely by NPS districted school. And what I mean by that is the address in which each child lives, like where they would be districted to attend. And this is most apparent at the elementary school level. So for last year, the percentage of school-age children attending non-public schools ranged from 6.7% in the Franklin district to 40.1% in the Ward district. So there's wide variation in the choices that families are making for their children. And that is all I have for my presentation. So I'm happy to answer additional questions.
Thank you. Questions? I don't believe it. Who's got a question?
So I also just want to know to the public that there were actually 15 pages of questions submitted by the committee, which helped to inform some of the conversation that's here. But if I might, Madam Chair, just characterize the types of questions. So lots of questions about the methodologies behind how the calculations are made and interest in the difference and variance between the McKibben report. Also, obviously, we're all, concerned about declining enrollment and what is it true? Is it not true? We have to check those things. So asking questions about residential development and the impact that might have on whether an area declines in terms of its enrollment for elementary. So one member noted, of course, so it does feel that meaningfully new developments are the reason that projections go up or down right now in terms of vis-a-vis, I guess, backed up against real estate turnover, which has not seemed to yield the young family enrollment that perhaps it once did. You explained the kindergarten ratio, so there were a lot of questions about that. Hold on. Some questions about how the census is used in terms of backing up against this information. More questions about the exits and entrances, which I think you've attended, and the approved to attend category, which maybe you all have questions about, is about McKinney-Vento program students. And those are students who are homeless and counted in different ways within enrollment between depending on where they matriculate from. And there is funding from the state that accompanies students who are considered homeless. I think those were the big pieces. We gave some specific detailed tables to the school committee regarding non-public students by elementary school. So the number that you just heard ranged between Ward and Franklin. We gave the school committee a detailed analysis and response about that. I think those were the big pieces. Do you remember anything else? The kindergarten student ratios do not account for students who matriculate to private school.
Correct. Yep. And that's historical. Like we're using them as a comparison point, and it's just the number of students who enroll here compared to the number of births.
That is everything. So good job putting that all into that presentation.
I have
Let's
a
start with
question.
Victor and then Mayor Laredo.
Dr. Ho, just want to say thank you. I know there's a lot of work that goes behind this, and so I appreciate it. If you're willing to or want to, would you care to comment at all about some of the private school migration back into NPS and what, if anything, you're seeing on that front?
Can you just say the second part?
Yeah, what if anything you're seeing on that front in terms of movement of folks who were in private schools that are now shifting back towards the NPS direction?
So, part of the reason that the variance from projection for the 21 to 22 school year was so large was that we thought we would see a lot of families come back from private school once, we were back full in person. That didn't happen. And it appears, especially at the elementary school level, that families who left for private school at that time stayed in private school. We did see there has been a slight shift, and this may have been one of the questions that was not specifically addressed in the presentation. There's been a slight shift in the pattern of enrollment in the cohort of students from grades 5 through 6. So in the past, or historically in Newton, we have seen CSR below 1 for that group of students, meaning that we are losing students as they move from grade 5 to grade 6. And typically that has been students who leave to go to attend private school, and then they tend to come back for high school. For the past 3 years, we've seen growth in that cohort. So my hypothesis is that students who would have left in grade 6 did it during the pandemic. So we're not really seeing a decline there in the way that we would have. And then the CSRs from grade 8 to 9 have been relatively stable. So it doesn't look like we're seeing more students coming back. However, I don't think we're hitting that age range yet, right? Like the students who left in elementary school for private school aren't high school aged yet.
So my interviews with private school parents make that not just a hypothesis in terms of it's really hard once your child starts to matriculate to a school, and many of the private schools might have a 7 to 12 age span or a K to 8 age span. And so they either wait till that natural transition happens, those types of things. I did share with the committee last night. Was it last night? It might have been last night. It feels like 2 days ago. Just some data from North and South and their enrollment tracking. So interestingly enough, we've had 100 transfers at North back into North since the October 1 data. So the data that you are seeing from Katie does not reflect what you're hearing here, because we have to use the October 1 data there. But it just gives the public a sense of the volatility that can happen within a school year. We had 100 transfers back into Newton Public Schools. 41 of those were returns from private school, and 19 of those were returns that had already attended Newton Public Schools in another time period and were returning. There were another 4 out of 24 international move-ins since the start of school that were re-enrollees. So they had been in the country, went out of the country, came back and re-enrolled. At South, we are up 128 transfers since the start of school. Private school, we had 3 students go out to private school and 19 come back in. of the 257 students who have at some point in their time at South been in private school, 110 of them have re-enrolled in NPS in high school. So that is a slightly different trend than we were looking at a couple years ago. And we're wondering what's going on with the junior class at North, where we have so much action back in. But I'm pleased to report that folks seem to be returning in those areas.
Are you set, Victor? Or Laredo?
Thank you. I've always loved this report. I find it fascinating. A couple of questions. One, what are we doing to track the reasons why people may decide to go to private school in the first instance? That's one bucket.
Mhm.
And the second would be people primarily in elementary school who choose to leave the public schools for the private schools. And have we been able to categorize that over time? Is it religion? Is it the facilities? Is it feeling like they need small class sizes? Are there reasons, and are those reasons changing? And then I have a follow-up question.
Okay, that's a great question. And that's a question we've been asked in the past. Prior to 3 years ago, we did not collect information on why people were exiting other than where are you going, right? So we have enrollment and withdrawal codes that we use so we can track where people have gone. We have implemented a withdrawal form within Aspen, which is our student information system, where when a family says they're going to withdraw, the school admin will ask them to fill it out. And there's a section where they can provide their reasons for withdrawal. Not everybody does that. But we do get quite a bit of information around why, and there's wide variation on why people choose to go to private school. A large driver is athletics. That comes up quite frequently. Religious schools are another reason. Many of the things we hear are our family has just always done this and we want to do it. So there's not one particular thing that comes up.
So on a going forward basis, and I appreciate the work, I would really be interested in trying to break it down into small broad categories. Athletics might be one. Our family's always done this too.
Sure.
We want a Jewish, Catholic, whatever education for our kids. Because I think following those trends will be helpful. My sense is we're never going to change. Someone says, as they should, I want a religious education for my kid. We don't offer religious education in a public school.
Mhm.
It's just the nature of what we do. If it's the building, for example, or the class size or the quality of instruction, that's very different. And I think we should track that. So I would hope that, and I realize it's not easy and it's voluntary participation, but if we can do that. Second, somewhat unrelated question. You did a really good job explaining, how if you build a new building, we calculate a certain number of kids who go in. And I realize this is probably very difficult, but part of the thing that happens when we build new housing is we are hoping to get people out of their existing, for lack of a better, often single family or condo situations, moving into a smaller unit, moving into Opus, someplace like that. Have we been able to track that at all as to what that looks like, or is that just almost impossible to figure out?
That would be great. We have not been able to track that because we would have to know who's moving into which apartments, and we don't have that information unless they have a student in NPS. So if someone is selling their home to move into an apartment, if a family moves into the home that they sold and enrolls in NPS, we would know that student lives there, but we wouldn't know where people went when they sold that home, unfortunately.
I just, and I'll stop. I raised the question because it has implications for planning on the city side as well as the school side. If we are going to see an expansion of housing, say in the village overlay districts, what impact can we expect in the rest of the city? And I realize it's extraordinarily hard. So thank you. Thanks.
Superintendent Linda Jason.
our former chair asked some similar questions of us, and to that end, we have recently decided to put together a Realtor event to try to get our hands around what are the trends that they are seeing. We have this gut theory that folks are purchasing houses later in Newton when their children are in secondary school. So one of my wonderings about who's moving into the high schools and the middle schools is it that the pricing of Newton houses means you need a little later in your family development before that is happening. That's a guess I have. I can't confirm that. So we have put it out to the Facebook pages of Newton about real estate. There's been great interest in us having that event. We're going to use it as two parts. One, we're going to ask some questions, and two, we're going to give information about our schools, boundary lines, all the assets that we have. So when our annual report is complete, we're targeting an April 1st date for that real estate event, and our Office of Family Engagement will lead that with us.
That sounds absolutely terrific. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this report. Thought it was fantastic. I have a follow-up question to the observation you made about over the past couple of years, we haven't seen the decline in enrollment as students move to middle school. The question that I have is, I thought, if I was interpreting the data correctly, we are seeing a little blip in the elementary years of grades 3 and 4 of people leaving for private school. Am I making that interpretation correctly? And if so, you know, do you think is there a story behind that? Like maybe families are making a decision earlier, and I don't know.
Can you was this in the non-public school section or?
Yeah, I think, can't find my original question. I think it was like I think it was around page 32.
Oh, okay. Yep. So that, okay. So page 32, so this is just looking at table 8. So that's not
Yeah,
right to
I
you?
think
Okay.
so.
Yeah. So on table 8, we're looking at enrollment by grade level in 2 different ways. So the first set of columns is looking at the net migration for the particular cohort. Does that look right to you? Is that what you were asking about? Okay, great. Yeah. So, so these first 2 columns on table 8 are looking at cohort change. So if you looked at like the 3rd grade row here, last year in 2024, we had a 3rd grade cohort of 833 students. And then if you look at that like diagonal line, it's showing this year that cohort grew by 15 students to 848 students for that cohort. The second set of columns, though, is looking at just actual change for the grade level. So here, what you're seeing in that grade 3 row is minus 47. And that's not looking at the same group of students. It's saying like last year's 3rd grade compared to this year's 3rd grade is 5.6% smaller.
Got it. Yep.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to echo that this is a lot of work and so really cool. I think it's, you talked about the ways it's used and looking forward 1 year. Obviously, no one can predict COVID, so it makes sense to take those out. And I think it's really impressive that as you look forward to next year's projections, it feels like we have a very good ability to get to that classroom projection. So I guess my question is more around the longer term time frame where we're looking 5 years out or so and thinking about long-term facilities and those types of important decisions. It sounds like there's a triangulation that's used for that across the couple of different reports. The McKibben, I guess, is updated less often. But I was noticing that the comparison charts where you had the line charts through 2030, I believe, showed that lower. And I've had a focus on elementary schools because there are some strategic questions before the elementary schools. And I've noticed that McKibben after 2030, like 2031 to 2034, actually changes its growth rate. And I think it's along the lines, if I'm understanding McKibben correctly, of maybe not exactly the methodology that Mayor Laredo is alluding to, but the similar concept of projecting based on demographics, the fact that we'll get more turnover and more younger families potentially coming in those timeframes. Now,
Yep.
that's not updated as often. I'm sure there's like some crystal ball reading and variability in that, but it sounds like, am I understanding correctly, that that's not a factor that this report has, and it's not attempting to project that type of a turnover?
Yeah, so the MPS report is using historical data to project the future, right? Those are what the CSRs are. So we're looking at what has happened over the past 5 years and using that to project forward. However, the kindergarten methodology somewhat incorporates that idea of growth, not specifically, like it's not a particular input in the formula, but we, by allowing the birth to kindergarten ratio to be higher than what we've seen in recent years, we're assuming we're going to start to see more families coming in. Now, that's only at the kindergarten level, right? It's not accounting for growth in the grades 1 through 12 that is potentially due to housing turnover. But the additional students that we add from residential development also accounts for that. And I'll just add one more piece there, that if we think people are going to sell their homes and move into the residential developments and be replaced by families, although we're adding students from the development, like if it goes the other way, we're still accounting for them because they're coming into the homes, if that makes sense.
Does, and I think we do want people who are moving to
Yeah.
stay in Newton,
Mhm.
but putting that aside momentarily, I guess my understanding the McKibben concept correctly, that based on past behavior of certain demographic ages where people are downsizing, we don't currently have a view of saying we're looking at the age profile in Newton and in the 2031 to 2034 timeframe in this report.
Yep.
We may see some, outflux or change in. Okay.
Yes, that's accurate. Just to put a finer point on that, so in speaking extensively with McKibben, he's done enrollment reports in 2 towns I've worked in. His big magic crystal ball is the number of widows over age 70 in a particular area. And I would say to you that Newton has prided itself on being attractive to those who want to age in place. And so I wonder if, because we are so good at all the things and all the ages, that demographic may not be as predictive as it might have been in other parts of the US.
Thank you.
Tamika? Thanks, Alicia. So Katie, as ever, excellent report. I don't have any direct questions for you on that. I do, however, want to make a comment to the superintendents, the event in March that you discussed, the Realtor event. So it would be my assumption, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that while you're mining that fertile group for information vis-a-vis the drivers of who's buying homes in Newton and what's their family composition, you're also going to be looking to push in information into that group as to what is the value of the NPS school that your families are looking to, reside in. And I'm not sure where the annual report falls in terms of publishing at that.
Did it
point.
April 1st for that reason.
Awesome.
You're
That's
reading my brainwave.
fantastic.
Mhm.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Just wanted to
Yep.
touch on that. Thank you, Alicia. Anyone else? Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you. All right, we will move on to the first read of the budget guidelines. And for those who don't know, the budget guidelines are sort of an internally developed, school committee developed document to get us to sort of coalesce around some priorities before we jump deep into budget season, so that we can continue to check ourselves and be sure that the budget that we end up with is one that reflects the priorities of the district, the strategic plan, and all that good stuff. So we have circulated the document. Jason lovingly put it together and has compiled the initial feedback. And I think there's
Everyone just pull their microphones closer. Use your best radio voices. and get in there. Lisa's just cueing me.
It was
Davis.
Oh.
the wizard in the closet.
Mr. Attendee in the closet.
So I think we can open discussion. Start with Linda.
Sure. So I thought this was fantastic. I just wanted to raise one topic, which is on the campaign trail. I heard time and time again about the focus on kind of the core academics. And so I wondered if we should adjust the language a hair under where it says Roman numeral 3 key priorities, and then the third one, it says breadth and quality of educational programming. And at times I have heard people voice to me that maybe we are too broad and forcing us to not be as deep as perhaps we should in some of our core areas. And I think in this particular instance, the feedback that I've received is largely at the high school level. Some of the classes there seem, and I'm not talking about CTE, I'm talking about some of the pure electives. And I don't know if we have data on, you know, how many students are enrolling, but I just wonder, is it a slight pullback on that language around breadth?
Thank you. Ben?
Thank you, Chair Peterloo and Vice Chair Barbwaj, for putting this together. It's great. I agree with Linda. That was the same note I had. I think these are two separate metrics that we should be weighing in on. I think breadth is one thing and we value it in one way, and quality is another thing that we value in another way. You know, I wouldn't want to be adding advanced meteorology before we feel like we've improved our 30% kids reading below reading level, right? Like if there's a way that those resources can be allocated that way. Now, sometimes superintendent might tell us it's not taking away from the quality of our math to have this elective. So it's not a trade-off we're making. It's just two things happening next to each other. But I think that we should have the opportunity to stack rank these two things separately instead of bunching them together.
Mayor Laredo?
Earlier on, before the key priorities, I would perhaps like us to talk about how we can then measure whatever return on investment we make. In other words, if we do something different, how do we propose to measure it and measure success? Otherwise, I really thought these were terrific. And I do like the order of priority, because I think we owe it to the superintendent and her team to rank order in some level of priority what we think we want to focus on. Otherwise, bluntly, it becomes a mishmash, and I don't think that helps. So I like very much the way we've done it.
Alicia? Tamika?
Thank you. So I suppose I'm of two minds in looking at the list. I mean, first and foremost, Jason, thank you for doing it. It's awesome. I'm glad I didn't have to. But a little bit of context as to the budget guidelines themselves as a document. It hasn't always been something that Newton School Committee has put forward and done and worked towards. It's only in its third or fourth year in recent history that we've started implementing the budget guidelines. And I'm sure when you looked at them, you thought, well, these are a list of things, but there's no ranking, there's no order, and that's gonna, what do you do with that?
And that was intentional by design. And that is because so many of these things are interrelated. And that interrelation makes it very difficult to say, okay, we want to work on modernizing the curriculum without additionally acknowledging the fact that there's professional development, that it flows into that modernized curriculum. Or we want to have, wonderful, quality of education, but we also need the facilities to match. And that, technology and all of these things, they feed in and they weave in and embed in ways that are really integral to some of these priorities. And so that's why there was not an attempt to put forward as one over another any individual priorities. I get the impetus to attempt to do that, but I also just want to caution that they're interrelated. And so it's for the superintendent to take this list and to say, okay, I can give you a 1, but I also need a 4 because I can't do the 1 without the 4. Or I need number 10 because we're really struggling with our, student services, and we need the technology to relate it to make it work. I don't know. I'm not an educator. None of us are. Victor, I see you, but you're not you're not sitting in your educator role right now. You're here as a school committee member, and it's our job to really utilize the superintendent and her team to tell us how these things flow together. Yes, I think absolutely give some direction, but not to be overly prescriptive about it. That's it. Yeah. Victor?
First, I just wanted to say, I think you completely nailed it in terms of the way you expressed it. And I was really just saying many of the same thoughts that I was going to do. What I'd say for the community is I can see how there could be misperceptions from my perspective on looking at things like 7, 8, 9, 10, the professional development, mental health. These are things that I know are very important to many educators who've spoken with me. But I think that key point you mentioned is that these are intertwined, right? You cannot do two without, so you cannot do curriculum development without the PD, exactly as you mentioned. I think that's very critical. The framing I would sort of think about it as is, to use an awkward metaphor, this is more like the range between, to me, AAA baseball and Major League, and not like T-ball versus like we're closer on these dimensions than we are sort of apart. But I think it's important for folks to understand it, regardless of which perspective they come from, that, like you said, these are more integrated, intertwined than necessarily differences. That said, when push comes to shove, it's not that we have an infinite amount of money to spend. I think this comes back to the same principles that with the amounts that we do have, we're going to have to make rational decisions about relative priorities. But it also speaks for the public that is listening, that if we're going to achieve all these 10 and hopefully down the road bigger priorities, we need to decide as a community how much we're going to frankly pony up to do it, to make it real.
Jonathan?
Thank you. I maybe have a couple of questions and a couple of thoughts. I think my first question is, how do I maybe an observation? I think a couple of things that were just said about the prioritizing and the sequence in which that we have these things in the document, I think get at something that Jason had down below, which is this comment around, like, I lack a framework for how to think about the trade-offs between these things. Right, there's this sort of observation within the document that I think many of us are reflecting on right here, which is, it's easy to put them in sequence this way on a piece of paper, but it's actually quite difficult until you get down to the brass tacks of, like, what are we talking about doing, and how do they how do these choices impact each other when we think about making them? So I appreciate that. I think the document acknowledges that in the context of this, and I thought that was worth pointing out. I think a couple of other maybe quick thoughts. I'm not sure, how should I think about, for a couple of these, I'm just not quite sure how to think about what goes in them. So for instance, when we talk about like lowering achievement gaps as a budget priority, I would have thought of lowering the achievement gap as kind of an outcome of doing the right things across these other categories, right? I would have thought of that as an outcome of, is MTSS working properly? Do we have the curriculum set up correctly? Are we doing a bunch of the other things here? maybe just if in the name of pausing on this one, how do I think about that? Is that a budget category of things that we're going to invest in, or is that a outcome of making sure that we're doing the right things across the other things that we spend money on? Is that how this works? Like, do I ask? I'll be honest. Like, do I get to just like ask that question here?
Well, I mean, I'm happy to give you my opinion.
Great.
I think that we have many groups within the community who you have all heard from on the campaign trail worried about the gaps for their children. Particularly partners like our CPAC partners and our LPAC partners are very worried in every single meeting, whenever an initiative comes. Are we really meaning all when we say all kids? So we could implement modern curriculum and have intervention services and have, class size management and all of those things and still not reduce achievement gaps. So I guess to Mayor Laredo's point, to me, the achievement gap piece tells you that I'm supposed to show you the outcome of what we expected to implement.
Got it. So these are priorities, not buckets of spending, is the way that I should think about these bullet points.
The way I understand them, and the committee can certainly correct me if I am wrong, the way I've understood them over time is, as we are developing the budget, Liam Hurley and I and our team, that we are supposed to hold these truths in our minds as you, the elected officials of the community, are telling us you've heard from the constituents about what to do next.
Got it. Okay. That makes more sense to me. Do I still have the floor? Can I make a couple other observations, or have I lost it?
Go ahead.
Okay. I guess squares maybe one of the other ones that I had, which is community engagement, which I understand if I put my priority hat on as opposed to my buckets of things that we're going to spend dollars on hat on, then that makes sense as well. It's not like we're going to propose to spend a bunch of specific dollars on community engagement. It's that we're going to make sure as we think about budgeting that's a priority for us as well. Okay.
Yeah, that's
and then
how
I guess, yeah, okay, that's helpful. And then I guess the final thing I would say is, as I read the professional development piece, I know that it is clear that is important. It is clear that we have started to make progress there and that we are doing big things. I didn't know I wonder whether this is best represented as invest in our educators, of which a huge piece of what we intend to do in the near future is to drive professional development. But there are certainly other ways in which we will believe it is the right thing. We will know it's the right thing to do to invest in our educators, to make sure that their careers are compelling and that the outcomes we drive in the classroom for teachers for our educators is compelling. But it felt like a rather narrow priority against what felt like a bigger set of issues to me that I think we would want to be thoughtful about. That was my final observation.
Great, thank you. Mayor Laredo?
Just briefly, I mean, I don't know what the practice was in the last 7-8 years about budget guidelines, but budget guidelines certainly have been around since I was here a long time ago. These are much better. They're clear, they're articulate, they're short. I think the point that was made about that they're interrelated is exactly right. They are. I think all we're trying to do for the superintendent is say, these are 10 things that are really important to us. These are important. Here, if you have to rank order them in some way, here's how we do it. But the mere fact that we're putting them in here emphasizes that these are things that we pay attention to. And I fully agree with the idea the superintendent then has to integrate that into, crafting a budget, because they're not in isolation. And I think to my colleague from Ward 6 point of view, you're not assigning dollar values to it. So, I mean, to me, the real question to the superintendent is, are these helpful to you? Do these give you the guidance you need? And if they do, then I think they work. And if they don't, we have more work to do.
No, absolutely. I need to know. I don't want to prepare a budget that is amiss from your priorities. Now, certainly you voted, well, this body voted a strategic plan and we've tried to make that in keeping with that. But even that group had slightly different first and second choices as well. So helpful information for us, gives us a direction.
Thank you.
Jason?
Thank you to my colleagues for filling out the survey and for the feedback. And thank you very much for the compliment on the structure. The process of compiling this was to go across many years and see what were priorities, infuse what I think we had heard, and then take in feedback. So, I mean, just reacting to a few of the points, I do very much agree that it's tricky to prioritize. And so I think that caveat, while I do like the concept of prioritization, I think the caveat that you mentioned makes a lot of sense to me, that we have to realize these are all heavily interrelated. And I guess to the chair, I have a question on direction in terms of where we want to wrap this first read with some pretty helpful feedback from the group. Is the goal for us take the feedback and update the version and discuss it again? And if so, I have a couple of specific questions on what the members may like to do. If not, and we're going in a different direction, then
Yeah, no, I am open to other ideas, but I think wrapping this into another draft would be great. And then also in the meantime, there could be feedback from the community who might be looking at it tonight or listening tonight and would like to share with any member some of their own thoughts. So please, with your question.
Well, one of the things thank you, that's helpful. And so the idea of additional feedback sounds great as well. Two members made pretty parallel suggestions around academic achievement. I'm inserting those words. You can see the verbatim comments that were suggested underneath it. Ensure high academic expectations in every classroom was one, and then elevating overall academic achievement. When I heard, I think Linda and Ben's comments on initiative number 3, there seemed to be some melding of the comments there. So do we think that there's a way to combine, if we're splitting out 3 and others are supportive of that, do we want to combine a breadth and achievement of academics with a range of educational programming and make those the split, if that's clear? I guess I'd love feedback on that.
State that one more time.
Yeah, if you look at
What numbers?
Item number 3, breadth and quality of educational programming, the feedback I was hearing from you both was this concept of breadth and richness in, I forget, astronomy, what was your example, is separate from the core. And so I'm hearing if we separate the core, in my view, but I would like feedback on this, I would suggest there might be quite a bit of overlap with these 2 additional suggestions we received. Should we try to integrate them?
Or do we need breadth?
I would say, can I go ahead? I would say absolutely. Absolutely. We need the breadth, the range. That's all the yummy science yummies and just use the superintendent's food terminology, but the science yumminess, the math yumminess, the art, the theater, the CTE. I think we need that depth and richness. And to that point, initially I was a little skeptical when whoever first articulated it, but I do think it does. There is some, really good bearing to say the volume of our courses should be looked at separate from the quality of our courses. And if that's the case, I'm totally okay with that. I think that's fair. And, but yes, I would say to your question, Linda, yes, we need the volume because that gives, my sporty kid an outlet whatever that is, and then my, you know, my robotics kid, an outlet, whatever that is, and all the kids in between. Ben?
Yeah, I think that makes sense, Tamika. I would look at that and say to Jason, I'm not sure it's valuable to the superintendent to say, have quality educational programming as a term to, as opposed to low quality education. Obviously, she's trying to have quality educational program. So I think it might be about splitting into the breadth of the educational programming, and then this question of the achievement, which to Jonathan's point before is a little bit more outcome than input. Some of these things, Dr. Nolan can pull a lever and make it happen, and she's checked the box. Others, she has to make some magic and then hope that it comes out performant. But I think that we should have somewhere on this list, and on my personal list, it's going to be pretty high, the idea of making sure that 30% of our kids are below reading level, and making sure that we are attacking that vigorously and creating the opportunities for all of our kids to academically thrive at our core subjects. And I think that we haven't exactly called that out as a specific point in the current construct.
Jonathan and then Victor.
I would quickly, just without using the term yummy, like to second what Tamika said. I in all seriousness, I think it's important. I think especially in a school system of the scale of ours, I do think that the ability to offer a breadth of experience and leverage that scale and be able to offer that breadth of opportunities, it should not be infinite. Advanced, meteorology 404, like probably isn't where I'd start, but I do think, I think that's important. And I support the idea of like splitting that into two issues, one of which is a breadth and one of which is an academic rigor. And just personally, I would empower Jason to figure out how the language sorts out for a redraft and all of that.
Thank you, Victor.
Thank you, Alicia. So I agree with the separation. I mean, half jokingly, I would say, the quality and breadth element, you're right. No one wants a lack of quality in their programming. To some extent, this rises an issue when those instances arise where quality is, for some reason, a trade-off with breadth, right? I think that's the element that we're kind of getting at. I might even go on a limb here a little bit. I think we all would like the breadth, and all it comes down to, again, with a finite budget, at what point are you deciding what you're going to trade off, right? And if we're going to artificially constrain it to, let's say, disciplines or subjects, it hurts me to say this as a violinist and conductor, but, personally, what I heard on the trail is if you're going to prioritize amongst the different disciplines that are out there, ELA, STEM, to some extent, CT, depending on with whom you speak, those are ELA, math, STEM subjects. Those are the big ones, the ones where a lot of standards are written against. And then if we can, we want to try to do whatever we can on the extracurricular perspectives, on the other things that are going to be important to developing the whole child. So I do think that's critical, but also, again, this is a much broader conversation around if the goal is down the road to have more breadth, which it should be. That's, again, a longer conversation I think we need to have with the community to make sure that we have the right funding to do that. I don't want to beat that horse, but I just want to throw out there that, like, with infinite money, this is an easy conversation. It's only because we have to make these trade-offs potentially that we have to give, in my opinion, some relative, order of priority guidance on disciplines.
Linda.
I just wanted to, support the comment that Ben said. I think that was really well articulated, and I would agree so strongly with what you said that I would make that number one. And just to clear the record on my comments around the breadth, I don't know if folks in the room or on Zoom have looked at the electives that are offered at the high school level. I don't want to specifically name them, but that's what I was getting at is, gosh, I'd love to take every one of those electives, but when push comes to shove, when we have such a tight budget, do we need every single one of those? And wouldn't we rather have an additional science class with 20 kids instead of 30 kids in it, or an additional English class with an additional level? That's what I was getting at. And when you look at that long list of electives, I don't know if they are absolutely as critical. Of course, we need the breadth of the extracurricular and so forth, but I guess I was kind of talking very specifically around that.
Else, Jason?
That was very helpful guidance, and I think I can take the pen and hopefully get close to something on those. Scheduling was the other suggestion that I don't think we've talked about now, and it says ensuring best practices are established and met for time on learning. That was a suggestion from a member that was not in the original list, and I was just curious if anyone would be willing to speak to that, to give guidance on whether it belongs in the list of 12. One other comment as an aside is, and this is, I think, also to Tamika's points, was none of these were like 1 out of 5. So I think that gave me some confidence that in general, we are honing in on a pretty strong list. And so I guess it'd be helpful for me to hear thoughts on from the group whether the scheduling belongs in that sort of everyone feels is important range.
Can you clarify what you mean by scheduling?
The words that the member used were ensuring best practices are established and met for time on learning. I know we've had some recent context on that. I don't know if someone else wants to speak to it further.
Well, I'm certainly passionate about this topic, and to me, it relates to attendance, and we've certainly heard Superintendent Nolan and others equate time in the classroom, and those students who have missed, 10 or more classes are not performing as well academically. So schedule as it relates to attendance in particular, I think is hugely important.
Anyone else? Mayor Laredo?
So I'm in complete agreement on the importance of attendance, both for faculty and students, okay? It's critical. If you're not there, you can't learn. If you're not there, you can't teach. I wonder, though, if that's really something that's part of the budget versus policies that the superintendent may put into place that may not be monetary. And I'd ask her, is that something that you view as monetary and financial, in which case it should go in, or is it something that you view as something that you develop and work on, but not necessarily financial implication?
So what I would say is it gives credence to the creation of the Family Engagement Center that could be seen in a tough budget time as an additional management position added within the central office. But it is the truancy prevention program. It is the attendance tracking. It is the home visits. So it helps to affirm an investment we already made last year to open that center. So it's helpful to me to know that piece. Mm-hmm.
Then I would be supportive of it if that is useful to you. I would personally put it lower on the list because it's important, but I think there's others that are really critical and are completely system-wide.
Ben, then Jonathan?
One of the principles I keep in mind in prioritization is when everything is a priority, nothing is. I'll put it
Welcome to my job.
I'll put it Are we at risk of diluting the value of the work if we go from 10, which is already a lot more than top 3 that I use in most of my professional environments? If we go from 10 to 12, are you going to start to drown, or is the fact that it's ranked maybe helps you, or how do you weigh in?
Well, I'll introduce you to my other favorite word, which is you could snuggle in the attendance portion under student services. because student services is not just special education, it is also all the supports that we put towards students to be their best selves. You can also put it under mental health and social emotional support. Many times, attendance issues are due to social, emotional, and mental health supports. So you don't have to make it its own item. You could prioritize it within a bucket that already exists here.
I think that was a graceful duck and I'll accept it. My opinion, Jason, is that it does belong on our list as something that I value and want us to remain focused on. Thank you, Dr. Nolan.
Jonathan?
Ben sort of took my thing. I was just going to say that I think we should challenge ourselves to stick to 10. Like, I think if you get beyond 10, like, I don't really know, but like, we shouldn't just add onto the list forever. So I feel like the conversation got had in the room, but at some point it's like, either we've got priorities or we've just got a laundry list.
Jason?
A suggestion then is with a split and an added academic priority, a potential additional priority around attendance, time on learning. Would Chair be comfortable with me having a revote, and we can look at the data to see if there's a clear couple that are below others? Otherwise, we would keep 12.
Sure. Yes. Oh, Ben, and then Victor.
I like it. I agree. Given that we have already established that everything was in 3, 4, 5-star land, and I said this to you offline, I'll suggest that maybe this time around you force us to force rank, and we'll all pull our hair out and smash our heads against the wall trying to figure out what's more important on this list. But by forcing us to do it, I think we may wind up with a more sort of consolidated product than if everybody gives 5 stars to a whole bunch of things. And it comes down to really more minor tweaks.
Sure.
Well, as usual, Ben, you're ahead of me. I was gonna say if it's helpful to you, Jason, I was gonna say we can do some version of like ranked choice voting to force it to a smaller set. I mean, my thing to some extent is these are great. If somebody comes up on the street and says, "What are your priorities?" we should be able to articulate them really quickly. And if it becomes 10 or 12, that's very unwieldy. But yeah, if there's anything I do to support, then great. But thank you for doing this.
Mika? Two things. I think for the next version of this, it would be instructive both for us and for the public to include, I don't know, the delta between, I don't know, it's not delta, that's the wrong word, but you know what I'm saying? Like there were 8 of the 9 who ranked this as 1, 8 of the 9 ranked this as 2, whatever it is. I think that would be a really good way of capturing the weighting of the different priorities in the rankings. Secondly, I really want to put a plug in for us to preserve quality as a goal, as a value that has budgetary implications. And the reason is without the quality, I think we would struggle for like item number 2, curriculum modernization. You've got to make sure that it's fertile and rich and is doing the task of educating our kids in a, in the modern way that we want, in the high performing district outcomes that we want. And so you have to have a way of infusing that. And I think it would be a miss, and maybe it belongs there, curriculum modernization, quality, material, whatever. But I think it needs to be in our budget if it is one of the things that we hold as a priority. Yeah.
Isn't that what Ben was talking about?
Don't recall the exact specifics, but if you say so, I'm happy to agree. Yeah.
Good for now? All right, great. It was a great discussion. Let's go to our final agenda item, which is 2 policies. First read of 2 policies. Will you be leading us in this?
I am.
Superintendent?
I'm going to play the part of in-house counsel for a moment.
Shall I introduce, these policies are up for discussion tonight because one of them is a newly recommended policy by the Massachusetts Association of School Committees, and one is a recommended revision from the Massachusetts Association of School Committees.
And-
Fourth known as MASC.
And just a reminder, the school committee has a subcommittee for policy development, and it has gone through that process and is being recommended to you after that process. First, policy KI is one that has existed in the Newton Public Schools with different language. As you'll find if you do a review of the MASC online handbook of Newton school committee policies, Newton school committees of the past combined two types of policy making within many of their policies. They have the actual policy as guided by law and best practice, and vision statements often conflated into those two things. That was very common in the 80s and the 90s in terms of school committee policies. More recently, MASC has been, as they suggest their updates, as they did in KI, just the facts, ma'am, so to speak. So one of the members just said, it just doesn't seem as friendly. And I just wanted to explain that there's nothing wrong. We're not suddenly not welcoming parents into the schools. In fact, we love them. We had a wonderful morning this morning with parents at South, and they're welcomed into the schools and doing all the things they do in schools that they've always done. That said, it is a more secure time in terms of how we operate buildings. Both of these policies tonight, KI and EBAC, respond to that change in the management and security of schools. So KI now is just to replace the other is the visitors to school policy, and talks about the typical best practices of allowing folks into schools, when that happens, how they're authorized to do so, and how building principals or designees permit folks for classroom visits. And then there's many other ways to do classroom visits. For example, when we're observing special education programs or being in classrooms as a volunteer, those types of things are codified in other policies within the system. So that's KI. ECAB is a completely new policy that MASC is recommending, which is about buildings and grounds in terms of, this came up a lot during the COVID time period across the Commonwealth. And I assume that this is a response of the MASC to that, about allowing communities to be using schools. We all believe that schools are parts of our community, but during school hours, school staff can't supervise other children, and other folks can't be directing other adults away from other children during that time period. It is a safety mechanism, and we have schools that are very much in busy locations. They are abutting community areas, and this just helps us to have some capacity to redirect grownups and other children that are not under our responsibility and care, that we are using those places. And then when we leave, you can come right on back into those spaces. So this was a policy that I see in a lot of Metro West areas, actually across the state. So we're recommending both for your consideration. This is a first read, and as we explained in our retreat, this will come before you for a second time, with the idea that we would hope you would vote it at that time. But if you're not ready to vote it, you let us know and we'll keep working on it. Thank you.
Questions? Victor, Ben, Jason.
Just a quick question and then maybe a quick comment. Could you remind me how we're thinking about school hours in this context, or is that defined for the public in a?
It's defined in our handbooks around when schools start and end. It's also on our website.
Perfect. Okay.
Mhm.
Two comments. One, I think both of these are fantastic, and quite frankly, I think I would be ready to move and vote if we're ready for a second read at some point. So that was, I think actually the KI one is one, or is it KI? Yes, KI is one that we've actually seen, I think, in some versions in the prior
Yes.
committee's instantiation. So I think that's perfectly reasonable. More of a side comment is, first of all, I want to recognize and thank the Newton Police Department and your team when there was that likely false
Swatting.
school shooter issue. That's been something I actually remember somebody on the campaign trail who was asking me about, like, school hardening, things of that nature. Obviously not thrilled to hear that happened, was thrilled to hear that there was a great response. I think that's important to recognize there. don't think it needs to go into this kind of policy, but I think my comment, I guess, is just that this access also involves that broader philosophy of how do we make sure that, doors are not being propped
That's right.
open, that God forbid
Mhm.
something actually happens in the future, we're ready for that circumstance through these things.
Thank you. If I may, Madam Chair. Also, since in the last 2 years, while our campuses are open at the high school level for students to come and go, they are no longer open as they have been for many, many years to the public. And this policy also helps to signal that change to the average community member. And that is in line with those types of best practices from the FBI, from the local security and threats, and our SROs and police officers. Quite unusual to have open campuses these days. Since the Columbine events many years ago, buildings have been closed. So this codifies what we have done in terms of the high school shifts. And
Picking up on the enforcement idea, are you thinking that we will be posting signs? Are we going to be actively chasing toddlers and caregivers off of playgrounds if we're not using them at the moment? How is this going to work?
so we would work with the city in regards to how we would sign those matters. So if you approve this, then we will reach out to Mayor Laredo and his team, and we will create the operational working conditions to make this reasonable.
I'm sure that working with our team, the Newton Police Department, we can do this in a family and individual friendly manner. We're not looking to penalize people. But at the same time, a playground during the school day when recess is going on, we really do have to enforce the rules, and I think it's for the safety of our kids. But I'm sure we'll balance this out and do it in an informative rather than a punitive manner.
Agreed.
Is that great, Jason?
Thanks. I agree with my colleagues' comments on the security policy, and I think it's a big, very helpful add. I was the member who asked the question about the previous version of the KI policy, visitors to the schools, which seemed particularly dedicated to the concept of parents going to classroom visits. And not, I agree with the context on omitting the flowery language is helpful, and I agree. I'm very supportive of that. However, I do think could be an interpretation of there being more to it than that. My personal read of the prior policy was that there was actually some degree of encouragement, at least on behalf of the school committee at that time, for parents to get inside the schools, and just welcomes parents, guardians, and guests to visit classrooms to observe and learn about the instructional programs taking place in our schools. Such visits can prove most beneficial in promoting greater school-home cooperation and community understanding. That may no longer be a good idea, similar to what we're saying, but it does feel to me to be more than just flowery language. It feels to me to be a substantive position difference. And so I guess I personally am curious about the arc of thinking on that access. I, for one, this is anecdotal, but I don't know of any parent who's been involved in a live classroom visit. And that may be by design and may be appropriate. I don't have a strong position on that, but I do notice a big difference.
So back in the early 90s, American Education Week had visits that was promoted. This was, of course, preschool shootings and a very different time period. In addition, state expectations for privacy laws for students, security checks for parents, all of those things have made some changes. And, I understand even in Newton, there were some rough changes in terms of some schools where parents were used to coming in the morning and greeting their kid's teacher and hanging at the door and all kinds of things like that. So there have been just some logistical changes. I myself have been on visits at the day school several times with parents. we are promoting visits through our PTO meetings. Parents don't usually stay because the meetings are long. So then they were like, I got to go to work or what have you. So I'm certainly open if we want to put a statement in there about, wherever we can, we encourage that. It's just different in terms of there isn't a place where parents can simply sign up and go and visit. It's just not a thing that schools do now due to all the constraints that we never want to think about and potential dangers. No.
I just would voice that I acknowledge that and agree that in the context of what you said, toning down the language or whatever does make sense. I would be supportive of some enhancement to the degree of what you're saying, which is context appropriate visits, building that connection to the schools. That is something that I've certainly heard out from the community.
Yeah, thank you. So Jason, I think you make an excellent point, and I would support including some language that captures the essence of what you feel is missing, because I too have, that's my read as well. And yes, when our middle school team, Jackie Mann, for example, at Day, open the doors and invite parents at these principal superintendent coffees to come and see education in practice, like see what the curriculum is, see what your kids are. It's awesome. It's wonderful. And I would encourage, and I have encouraged the superintendent to try to deploy that more broadly across, the schools in the district. So that's one thing. The other is just that, I love that we're revisiting these policies and keeping them apace with the MASC standards. But I don't want to necessarily lose some of that, the preambles that help to explain the drivers of why certain things are necessary. So again, that's getting back to Jason's point. And Ben, you hit the nail on the head in terms of how do we let people know that this is the policy? It's fine to have a policy, but if it's in a vacuum and it's not a posted somewhere, noticed somewhere, then it's going to be really hard to implement that policy. And it's going to create issues where just even like a post on a fence as you walk into, I know I see signage that says where to put my baggies of my dog's leavings. And so I think this is a simple one, and I'm happy to hear that the Laredo administration is going to make sure that we can get some good signage out there to let visitors know. Because I was one of those caregivers who said, oh, a park, a playground, lovely. No one's out there. But when the bell rings and kids are out there, we don't want to have that kind of confluence of school students and visitors. And so, yeah, I think it's a great point to put that signage up and work towards that. That's it. Thank you.
Jonathan?
I'll confess, when I first read this, I'm not sure I fully internalized that. The consequence of the access of the building and grounds access policy is that you really aren't allowed to use the playground at like the outside grounds at like Mason Rice, for instance, during the school day, even if there's nobody out there. Like, is that actually what the policy says?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm not sure I like that. Like, is that the question? Is that the question here before the committee? Is that what we want?
Yeah.
Let me say it differently. I would feel better about. I'll make an assertion, then I'll turn it back to the room because I saw Mayor Laredo raise his hand. I would be much more comfortable with a policy that said something to the effect of, the school has first right on it, and you may be asked to leave it in the, when the other kids are out, when it's in use for recess or something, in active use by the school. I'm not super excited about a policy that says, it's 9 a.m. on a Thursday, everybody's in school, and somebody's out there with a toddler, and you can't use this playground. That doesn't feel good to me.
Laredo, did you want to?
I appreciate that, but I'm really concerned about enforcement and and confrontation here. You know, you have I'm the grandparent. I'm out there with my 1.5-year-old. I've taken the morning off. I'm at the Ward School playground. Boom, the kids come out of the fourth grade and they're running on the playground. Now what do I do? It's a it puts everybody in a very awkward situation. And I think it would be much easier if there was just a clear rule. Hey, look, it's school time. And you know what? I'll be really kidding. I don't think people are looking to be punitive here. Okay. But it is, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but if there's somebody there for 5 minutes, they're going off the field, they go on the slide for a minute, they go home. I really can't imagine the principal starting to call the Newton Police Department. I would hope not, but it allows for a very clear, bright line enforcement. I got to say, in this day and age, and I've shifted my views on this over time. On this day and age, we just got to make sure that we don't have people in school property who we don't have any control over, quite frankly. And I think there's risk for us otherwise. And it's unfortunate. I agree. It's very unfortunate that we're in that situation.
I think it also puts educators in a really tough spot, especially instructional aides who might be supervising recess, to be the ones to go up to a family and say, I'm sorry, you know, grandpa, take your 1.5-year-old off this field. That's just not something that, of all the things we ask them to do, you know, Tamika.
And to be clear, that's probably still going to have to happen. Just because we post a sign or adopt a policy doesn't mean that, you know, the family or the grandpa or whomever is going to automatically know and adhere to the new policy. I think the way I think of it, and my view has shifted over time too, because I was one of those parents with the 3-year-old twins just moved to Newton. And I got to tell you, Boyd Park, right there with Lincoln Elliott, it was our playground. And so I think this is just a tool to allow staff, because they're going to still have these interactions, to be able to point to something to say, and look, see, we've done you the courtesy of posting it and saying that this is the policy. And I would just hope that folks respect and observe it.
I can just tell you one real life experience from my own principaling. You know, young kids on a playground, which may or may not be age appropriate for them, right? So sometimes people bring people to the wrong playgrounds. You know, it's like an upper elementary playground. The child gets hurt, or out barrel the fourth graders and knock over that 1.5-year-old. And that was a really hard situation for me to deal with as a principal, because the parent was irate that their child had, and then there's a legal action because the child hurt themselves. So what our principals have said to us is that they have nothing to stand on right now. So they have no authority. And so they're managing disputes with children that they have no jurisdiction over, and parents who may or may not attend our schools. And so, there's no way to say, well, look, you can come back at X time and that's the policy and it's posted and those. So we'll still have some issues, but I've found having the posted scenario and also including it in our handbooks so that it gets around to the public helps. And we do have a sign off for all the families, in our community, and word gets around. It does help. It won't be perfect and we won't be punitive, right? So our preschool principal is the person who deals with this the most right now, and they work it out. They work it out, and it generally involves saying like, here's the expectation. We have a lot of little people here. We have students with disabilities. Here's the time when you can come back and you can have unfettered access to our playground. And then people get into new routines.
Jonathan?
I appreciate that color both from Mayor Laredo and Dr. Nolan. I think that's really quite helpful. And ultimately, I will be supportive of what it is that we need in order to make this work for the schools and for our educators and for the kids on the playground. I think all that makes sense to me. I just observe at a time when we just talked about community engagement being,
Mm-hmm.
when we talked about community engagement being a priority for us over the next couple of years, drawing harder boundaries in terms of this just feels a little at odds to that. But I get it, and I entirely understand the need, and I entirely understand the need for to be able to point to a policy that backs stuff up. But it comes down to the details of how it gets enforced.
Thank you. Anyone else? Dr. Nolan?
Might I just suggest, in thinking through what you're saying, Jason, in paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, visitors to schools during non-school hours or non-school days, access to school buildings is limited to those attending school and district events for uses authorized by the superintendent or their designee. Building access and building access will be allowed only to those participating in or attending authorized events. These events may include context-appropriate school visits at the discretion of the building principal.
Jason? Warm enough? What do you think?
I am of the mind that in this stage, because, and I agree, and I actually have been to, as an elementary parent, a day middle school visit to the specials, and it was fantastic. I'm of the mind that some of that mission-oriented language is helpful because I think the default mode, Principal Mann, perhaps to an exception, is not to enable those types of visits. That's my personal opinion. I'm supportive of the policy otherwise, and won't get in the way, but that's just me voicing my interest in community being in the schools in appropriate ways.
Sure.
Sorry, I didn't mean to beat that horse, but this is actually making me think of a lot more issues. This is very pedantic, but I don't know if anyone knows the answer to this. The tennis courts at South, for example, my understanding is that like Parks and Rec in the past, I was just trying to double check that, has leveraged that facility. I was always presuming that it's after school hours, or does anyone know the answer to some of those facilities? Because I'm using the same principle in my mind, like
Yeah.
it should be consistent, I would think, but I'm just trying to think if there's any other.
So there are certain programs that are governed specifically through Parks and Rec that have specific sign up and logistics and scheduling with our folks. So trust me, I get a lot of feedback about we get first priority on the things during the school day. And then, obviously people want more access in the community, and whenever we can, we give it. That is not the kind of thing, like there isn't a bunch of teenagers coming out to play tennis during the day. So that is not the same scenario. And that's a documented Parks and Recs program, at least as it currently exists.
And I'm not trying to micromanage. It just made me wonder in that third paragraph, what do we need to add except for recognized school, district, or city activities to cover our bases? Again, I'll defer to Jill's guidance on this as counsel.
See what we need to do there.
But I think,
It's a good suggestion.
The point that we can continue just to emphasize to folks is like, I think, Mayor Loretta's on point here that we do, I think, have to do our best to make sure we're spreading this information to folks proactively when we say, hey, these changes are here, and understand it's not like you're going to slap people on the wrist immediately when it happens, but over time, people will just kind of, I think, understand the shift. It'll probably be for the better as long as we explain the reasons why.
At the risk of going back and forth across the two policies, the aspect specifically on KI and 2-year added languages, I think was helpful, that may be missing, that I think would be helpful in the situation I have in my mind is a parent is interested in going to visit a school, is that there's some very modest way of saying the committee is supportive of appropriate opportunities for the parents to go. Because I think even just that small touch means that a reticent person would give it a thought before saying no.
So my only concern there is we do not have an admissions group that can just simply tour parents around, right? So I don't want to send the message, that the principal can just bring people at any time. There are provisions for, specific program visits. We do have open houses when we have the, curriculum nights, and we are talking in the school system about how can we parallel the things like visit days or tours of the buildings when, like private schools do, but we don't have an admissions office. And during the school day. I don't want to disrupt the learning any more than that. That said, I do want to say to you that a lot of the work that's being developed, let's use our new English language arts curriculum at the K-5 level. There's a showcase at the end of each of the units where parents are invited in to hear about whatever the thing is that they've created and those types of things. And I mean, I see parents in all the time, particularly at the elementary level, doing that kind of, seeing the showcases, seeing the activities. So what I'm hearing though is you want some sort of welcoming, some sort of language that says that, whenever possible and appropriate, we encourage parents to take advantage of opportunities the school district puts out there for you to visit, something to that effect.
Yes,
Okay.
that sounds great.
Anyone else? All right, folks, we are adjourned.
Good first meeting.
job.
Nice job, Alicia.
Thank you.
Feel better, Jonathan.